Sometimes you don't realize how much you've lost until you return to the place where it all began. For Ramie Dunn, coming home after 40 years meant facing the one thing she'd spent a lifetime running from. The cave sat high on the mountain. Above town, a dark opening the locals whispered about but never entered. They'd warned her to stay away, just like they'd warned her mother and her grandmother before that. But Ramie was 62 now, and her son was missing somewhere she couldn't reach him. The letter she found in his belongings pointed to this place, to secrets buried deeper than any grave. What was hidden inside that cave that an entire town spent generations protecting? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranger's shack sat at the base of Crowder Mountain, like a forgotten promise. Ramie had driven the last 20 miles in silence, watching the familiar peaks emerge through morning mist, each curve in the road pulling her deeper into memory. The wooden structure looked smaller than she remembered. Its green paint faded to the color of old moss, the front porch sagging on one side where the foundation had settled. Her father had lived here for 30 years, keeping watch over the trails and the forests, and the thing nobody talked about but everyone feared. She parked her truck in the gravel drive and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel. Through the windshield, she could see the cave entrance far above, a dark slash in the grey rock face. Even from this distance, it seemed to watch her. The key was where her father's lawyer said it would be, under the third stone in the line marking the garden bed her mother had planted in 1967. Ramie knelt and felt around until her fingers found the brass key, still bright despite the years. She held it in her palm and remembered her mother's hands working this same soil, planting tomatoes and beans while humming old hymns. That was before the sickness took her, before the fear. Inside, the shack smelled of dust and pine. Furniture sat beneath white sheets like ghosts waiting for recognition. Ramie moved through the room slowly, pulling back covers to reveal her father's life. The worn armchair where he'd read his westerns, the kitchen table with one leg shorter than the others, the narrow bed where he'd died in his sleep 3 months ago at 87. The lawyer had said it was peaceful. He'd simply not woken up. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, photographs tracked the years. Her parents on their wedding day in 1955, both of them serious and young. Her own school pictures, a progression. Of gap-toothed smiles that stopped abruptly at age 17. Nothing after that. No graduation photo, no wedding portrait, no pictures of grandchildren. Her father had frozen her in time at the moment she left, but on his desk in the corner, she found something that made her breath catch. A recent photograph, printed on computer paper and carefully placed in a simple frame. Marcus in his dress uniform, standing at attention, his face composed and strong. Someone had sent this to her father. Marcus had sent it, she realized. Her son had known where to find the grandfather he'd never met. Ramie picked up the frame and studied her son's face. He had her dark eyes and strong chin, but his height and broad shoulders came from somewhere else, from someone else. She'd never told him about his father. That married man who'd promised to leave his wife and never did. That man was 20, years in the ground now, buried in the church cemetery with full honors despite his private sins. The desk drawer stuck when she pulled it, swollen from years of mountain humidity. Inside, she found what she'd been looking for without knowing she was looking for it, her father's ranger logbook. The leather cover was cracked and worn, filled with his careful handwriting documenting daily patrols, weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and trail maintenance. She flipped through pages dated from the 1970s, reading his methodical notes. Then she found the entries about the cave. Her father's handwriting changed when he wrote about it, becoming tight and cramped. The entries were sporadic, sometimes months apart, but they painted a picture of something wrong. Hikers who reported hearing voices, locals who went up the mountain and came back changed, and every few years someone who didn't come back at all. Several pages had been torn out. The ragged edges showed where paper had been ripped from the binding, removing entries from specific dates. Ramie counted 7 gaps, each one corresponding to a year when someone from town had vanished. She knew the stories. Everyone did. The Pritchard boy in 1979, the Somerville woman in 1983, Old Man Foster in 1991. The list went on. Her father had documented something, then destroyed the evidence. Ramie set the logbook down and moved to the window. The town of Ashford Creek spread below her, a collection of weathered buildings following the curve of the creek that gave it its name. Population 847, the sign at the town limits claimed, though Ramie suspected that was optimistic. This was coal country that had lost its coal, mining towns that had survived by sheer stubbornness and nowhere else to go. She'd grown up in a house 2 streets from the general store, raised on her mother's biscuits and her father's silences. Life had been simple until it wasn't. Until Tommy Wilkes, the youth pastor's husband, had noticed her in a way that made her feel seen for the first time. Until 3 months of secret meetings in his truck led to a positive pregnancy test and a world that came crashing down. She remembered sitting at her parents' kitchen table, 17 and terrified, watching her mother's face crumble. Her father had said nothing, just stood and walked out. It was her mother who'd made the arrangements. The aunt in Charleston. Who would take her in? The story they'd tell about a scholarship, the understanding that she wouldn't come back. But she had come back. Once, for her mother's funeral 15 years ago, slipping in and out in a single day while people whispered behind their hands. And now, permanently, because she had nowhere else to go and a son who'd vanished without explanation. Marcus was 42 now, career military, Army intelligence. He'd served 3 tours overseas, earned decorations she didn't fully understand, and called her every Sunday like clockwork, until 3 months ago, when the calls stopped. The Army told her he was on assignment, classified location, no contact authorized. But then the letter arrived. Ramie pulled it from her coat pocket now, unfolding the single page. The handwriting was rushed, unlike Marcus's usual careful script. "Mother," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm not where they told you I am. I'm sorry for the lies. I found something about my past, about our family. I need to understand before I can come home. The coordinates below will explain everything. Trust your instincts. Trust what you know in your heart. I love you. Below." That, a string of numbers that marked a specific location. Ramie had looked them up online before making the drive from Charleston. They pointed to a spot on Crowder Mountain, directly at the cave entrance. A knock at the door startled her. Through the window, she saw a sheriff's department cruiser parked behind her truck. The man on her porch was young, maybe 35, with the careful posture of someone uncomfortable with authority. His badge read, Sheriff J. Porter. He touched the brim of his hat when she opened the door. "Mrs. Dunn, I'm Sheriff James Porter. Wanted to stop by, welcome you back to town, see if you need anything." His tone said he was doing nothing of the sort. His eyes said he wished she'd keep driving. "I'm fine, Sheriff. Just settling in." "That's good. That's real good." He looked past her into the shack, then back at her face. "I knew your father. Good man. Kept to himself mostly, but good." He did keep to himself. Porter shifted his weight. "Listen, Mrs. Dunn." "Ms. Dunn. Ms. Dunn. I know you've been away a long time. Things here, they're the same as they always were. Quiet, we like to keep it that way. I'm just here to take care of my father's property." Sure. But folks are wondering, you know, how long you're planning to stay. Whether you might be thinking about—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Whether you might be thinking about going up the mountain, to the cave." There it was, the real reason for his visit. "Why would I do that? Your father used to patrol up there. I thought maybe you'd want to see where he spent his time." Porter's face remained neutral, but his jaw was tight. "I'm here to tell you that's not a good idea. The trails up there are unsafe, caves unstable. We keep it posted and blocked off for good reason." Ramie studied him. "You're the 3rd person to warn me about that cave, Sheriff. The woman at the gas station in town. The man at the general store who refused to sell me hiking supplies. Now that's a lot of warning for a simple, unstable cave. People care about safety around here. Or people are afraid. Porter's expression hardened. Ma'am, I'm going to say this plain. That cave has taken people. Good people. My own brother went up there 20 years ago, said he wanted to explore it. We found his truck at the trailhead. Never found him. So when I tell you to stay away, I'm not being superstitious. I'm trying to keep you alive. They stood in silence for a moment. Finally, Ramie nodded. I appreciate your concern, Sheriff. He didn't look convinced, but he touched his hat again and turned to leave. At his cruiser, he paused. Your father knew. He knew what that cave was. That's why he never went inside, not once in 30 years. You do well to follow his example. Ramie watched him drive away, dust rising behind his tires. Then she turned back to the desk and her father's logbook, flipping to the last entry he'd made before he died. The date was 3 months ago. The day before Marcus's call stopped, her father had written only 5 words. The boy came asking questions. Below that, in different ink, as if added later, I should have told her everything. Ramie felt her chest tighten. Marcus had been here. He'd found his way to this shack to his grandfather, and her father had known something he'd taken to his grave. She spent the rest of the day unpacking her few belongings and cleaning the shack. As the sun set behind the mountain, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she made herself a simple dinner from the supplies she'd brought. The silence was profound, broken only by the creek below and the wind in the pines. She thought about Marcus as a baby, the way he'd grip her finger with his tiny hand. The first time he'd called her Mama, his high school graduation, standing tall in his cap and gown. The day he'd enlisted, so determined to serve something larger than himself. She thought about the years of Sunday phone calls, the way he'd always ask about her health before telling her about his own life, the birthday cards he never forgot to send, the quiet, steady love of a son for his mother. And she thought about the cave on the mountain above, waiting in the darkness, whatever her father had known. Whatever Marcus had discovered, the answer was up there. The entire town could warn her away, could whisper and avoid her eyes, but she'd come home for a reason. Not to hide this time, not to run. She was 62 years old, and she'd spent 40 years carrying shame that didn't belong to her. If her son was in trouble, if he needed her, then no amount of fear would keep her away. Ramie washed her dinner plate and set it to dry. Then she pulled out a topographical map of Crowder Mountain and began planning her route to the cave. The locals had warned her to stay away. They should have known she'd never been good at following. Morning's dawn came cold and grey to Crowder Mountain. Ramie stood on the porch of the ranger's shack, watching mist rise from the valley below. She'd packed a day bag with water, trail food, a flashlight, and her father's old compass. The topographical map was folded in her jacket pocket. The route she'd traced in pencil the night before, already committed to memory. The trail began a quarter-mile up the access road, marked by a weathered Forest Service sign and a chain stretched between 2 posts. Beyond the chain, an additional warning had been bolted to a tree. Danger, cave system unstable. Entry prohibited by order of Ashford County Sheriff's Department. Ramie stepped over the chain. The path was overgrown, but still visible, worn into the mountainside by generations of feet. Her boots found purchase on exposed roots and stones, her breathing steady despite the incline. She'd stayed in shape over the years, walking the neighborhoods in Charleston, climbing the stairs in her apartment building. At 62, her knees ached and her back complained, but her body still did what she asked of it. The forest was quiet. No bird song, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just the sound of her footsteps and her breath and the wind moving through pine branches overhead. It felt wrong, that silence, unnatural. After 40 minutes of steady climbing, she reached the first marker, a boundary stone her father had mentioned in his logbook. The carved numbers were worn, but still legible. 1883, the year of the mining disaster according to the records she'd found. 12 men had entered the cave that year. 3 emerged, and they were never the same. The trail leveled out, following the contour of the mountain. Through breaks in the trees, Ramie could see the town below, small and distant. From up here it looked peaceful. Picture-perfect Appalachia, the kind of place people wrote songs about and then left as soon as they could. She almost missed the tree. It stood alone in a small clearing just off the trail. An ancient oak with branches that spread like grasping fingers. And hanging from one of those branches, turning slowly in the breeze, was a set of military dog tags. Ramie's heart stopped. She knew those tags. She'd watched Marcus put them on every morning for 20 years, the metal chain disappearing beneath his uniform shirt. She'd held them once, reading the stamped information, his name, his service number, his blood type. With shaking hands, she lifted them from the branch. The metal was warm, as if recently worn. Marcus's name caught the grey morning light, but Marcus was supposed to be overseas. The army had told her he was on assignment, classified, no contact possible. They'd assured her he was fine, just doing his duty in a place they couldn't name. How were his dog tags hanging from a tree on Crowder Mountain? Ramie looked around wildly, half expecting to see him standing there. "Marcus?" Her voice cracked. "Marcus, are you here?" Only silence answered. She clutched the tags to her chest, fighting the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. This wasn't possible. It made no sense. Unless the army had lied. Unless Marcus had never been overseas at all. Unless he'd come here, to this mountain, and something had happened. Or unless he'd left them here as a message. A breadcrumb for her to follow. Ramie looped the chain around her neck, tucking the tags inside her shirt. The metal rested cold against her skin, right over her heart. Then she kept walking, faster now, driven by something between hope and terror. The cave entrance appeared through the trees like a wound in the mountainside. The opening was perhaps 12 feet high and 20 feet across, a gaping darkness that seemed to swallow light. More warning signs were posted, these ones older, their paint flaking. One had been knocked over entirely, the post broken at its base. Fresh footprints marked the soft earth near the entrance. Ramie knelt, examining them. Boot treads, size 10 or 11. Marcus wore size 11. The prints led directly into the cave mouth and didn't come back out. She pulled out her flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a wide passage that sloped gently downward. The walls were rough limestone, marked with old tool marks where the miners had expanded the natural opening. She could see maybe 30 feet before the passage curved away into shadow. The air coming from the cave was cool and damp, carrying a smell of minerals and something else. Something organic and ancient, like the breath of the earth itself. Ramie took a step inside. The acoustics changed immediately. Her footsteps echoed strangely, the sound bouncing back with an odd delay. She took another step, then another, following the boot prints in the dust. The passage walls closed in gradually, the ceiling lowering, until she had to duck slightly to avoid scraping her head. Then she heard it. A voice, faint and distant, coming from deeper in the cave. "Mom." Every nerve in her body went electric. That was Marcus's voice. She'd know it anywhere. The particular timbre and tone she'd been hearing for 42 years. "Marcus!" She hurried forward, flashlight beams sweeping the passage. "Marcus, where are you?" "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I should have told you. I should have—" A grinding sound cut him off. Ramie looked up just in time to see a section of ceiling crack. Instinct made her throw herself backward as rocks began to fall, small ones first, then larger pieces. The passage filled with dust and the roar of stone hitting stone. She scrambled back toward the entrance, covering her head with her arms. A rock the size of her fist glanced off her shoulder, sending pain shooting down her arm. Another hit her thigh. The world was dust and noise and chaos. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Ramie lay on her back just inside the cave entrance, coughing, her flashlight beam cutting crazy angles through the settling dust. Where the passage had been open, there was now a pile of rubble. Not enough to seal the cave completely, but enough to make proceeding extremely dangerous. She pulled herself to her feet, wincing at the pain in her shoulder and leg. Nothing felt broken, just bruised. But the message was clear. The cave didn't want her inside. Or someone didn't want her inside because that rockfall hadn't been natural. She'd seen the way the ceiling cracked, the way the stones fell in sequence. Someone had rigged it. Someone had been watching, waiting for her to enter far enough to trigger the collapse. Ramie limped out into the daylight and stood there, breathing hard, her hand pressed against Marcus's dog tags beneath her shirt. Her son's voice had called to her from the darkness. His voice, but was it really him? Or was it something else, something the cave had taken and twisted? The boot prints leading in told her Marcus had entered. The absence of prints leading out told her he was still inside. Dead or alive, trapped or hiding, her son was somewhere in that mountain, and someone had just tried to stop her from finding him. She looked back at the cave entrance, at the pile of fresh rubble. Then she looked down at the town below, peaceful and quiet in the morning light. Down there, people were waking up, making coffee, starting their days. And every single one of them knew something about this cave. Every single one of them was keeping a secret. Ramie started down the trail. Her shoulder throbbed. Her leg would have a nasty bruise. But her mind was clear for the first time in months. The cave held answers. Marcus was connected to it somehow. And the town had been protecting these secrets for generations. Her father had been part of it. The sheriff was part of it. Probably everyone she'd known growing up was part of it. She'd come home looking for her missing son. What she'd found was a conspiracy that ran deeper than she'd imagined. And if the entire town thought they could warn her off with rockfalls and danger signs, they didn't know Ramie Dunn at all. She'd left this place 40 years ago as a scared 17-year-old girl. She'd come back as a mother who'd lost her son, and there wasn't a force on earth that would stop her from finding him. Not fear, not warnings, not collapsing caves, and certainly not the secrets of a town that had turned its back on her when she'd needed them most. By the time she reached the ranger's shack, the sun had burned through the morning mist. Ramie stood on the porch and looked back up at the mountain. The cave was invisible from here, hidden in the rocks and trees, but she could feel it, like a presence watching from above. Whatever was happening, whatever connection Marcus had to that place, she would find the truth. Even if she had to tear this whole town apart to do it. The Ashford Creek Public Library occupied the ground floor of what had once been the town's only bank. Built in 1923, the brick building still had the original vault door visible behind the circulation desk, now used to store rare books and historical documents. Ramie pushed through the heavy glass door, setting off a small bell. The woman at the desk looked up, and Ramie saw the recognition flicker across her face. The same expression she'd seen at the gas station, the general store, everywhere she went in this town. A mix of surprise and something else. Wariness, maybe. Or guilt. Can I help you? The woman was perhaps 70, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read, Librarian. I'm looking for information about Crowder Mountain. The history of the cave. The woman's fingers tightened on the book she'd been processing. We have some general history materials. Local interest section, third shelf from the window. I'm looking for something more specific. Newspaper archives, maybe. Records of disappearances, a long pause. We keep the archives in the back. They're not generally available to the public. Ramie stepped closer to the desk. My father was John Dunn. He was the ranger here for 30 years. I'm staying in his shack, settling his affairs. I know who you are. The woman's voice softened slightly. I knew your mother. We were in the same quilting circle before she passed. Then you know I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because my son is missing, and I think he came to Crowder Mountain. I need to understand what's up there. The woman studied her face for a long moment. Then she stood, pulling a keyring from her pocket. Follow me. But we never had this conversation. The archive room was small and smelled of old paper and mildew. Boxes lined metal shelves labeled by year. The woman pulled down several from the 1950s through the 1990s and set them on a scarred wooden table. The Ashford Gazette stopped publishing in 2003. Everything before that is in these boxes. But you won't find what you're looking for in the newspapers. Why not? Because we learned a long time ago not to write about certain things. not to speak about them in ways that could be recorded. The woman opened one of the boxes and pulled out a manila folder. But there are things that were saved, things that were supposed to be destroyed but weren't. She handed Ramie the folder. Inside was a collection of loose photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. On top was a photograph that made Ramie's breath catch. 5 women stood at the entrance to the cave. The photograph was black and white, faded, dated 1952 on the back in pencil. The women wore long skirts and sensible shoes, their hair styled in the fashion of the time. They all looked terrified. Ramie's hands trembled as she studied the faces. The woman, second from the left, was younger than the others, maybe 25. She had Ramie's eyes, her bone structure. "That's my mother," Ramie whispered. "That's all of our mothers," the librarian said quietly. "Mine is there too." Third from the right. They called themselves the Witness Circle. Every generation had one. What were they witnessing? The truth about the cave. About what it does. The librarian pulled a chair over and sat down heavily, as if this conversation exhausted her. "You need to understand something about this town, about our families. We've been here since 1847. The founders came from all over, running from something or towards something. They found this place and they found the cave, and they made an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind you don't speak about in daylight." The librarian folded her hands in her lap. "The cave takes things, secrets, sins, the things people can't carry anymore. But it doesn't let go easily. It holds on to them, echoes them back. And sometimes it holds on to the people too." Ramie set the photograph down carefully. "That's superstition, is it? Then explain the pattern. Explain why every few years someone from a founding family goes into that cave and doesn't come out. Explain why the ones who do come out are changed. Explain why your mother went in there when she was pregnant with you and came back different." The room seemed to tilt. "What? You didn't know?" The librarian's expression was sad. "Of course you didn't know. They wouldn't have told you. Your mother went into that cave in 1962, about 6 months before you were born. She was gone for 3 days. When they found her, she was at the entrance, unharmed, but unable to speak about what she'd seen. She never spoke of it, not to anyone. But we all knew. The Witness Circle knew." Ramie's mind raced. Her mother had never mentioned anything about the cave beyond the general warnings everyone gave. She'd been a quiet woman, prone to long silences and sudden tears, but Ramie had attributed that to the hardness of mountain life and her father's emotional distance. Why would she go in? The same reason anyone goes in: to confess something, to lay down a burden. The librarian reached across and touched Ramie's hand. "Your grandmother died in childbirth in 1961. Your mother was there when it happened. I don't know what guilt she carried about that, but it drove her into the cave. And something in there, whatever lives in those passages, it took her confession. But it marked her too. Marked your whole family line. That's why everyone warns me away. That's why we're terrified of what might happen if you go back in." The librarian's grip tightened. "Your mother went in carrying you. You were exposed to whatever dwells in that mountain before you were even born. And now your son, Marcus, went in," Ramie finished. "Following the same pattern. The cave calls to certain families. It has a hunger for certain bloodlines. Your grandmother, your mother, you, your son. 4 generations connected to that place." The librarian released her hand and stood. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, but I'm also telling you to leave. Pack your things and go back to Charleston. Let your son go, because if you enter that cave, you might not come back. And if you do come back, you won't be the same person who went in." Ramie gathered the photographs and documents, studying each one. There were newspaper clippings about missing persons, always carefully worded to avoid mentioning the cave directly. There were notes in her mother's handwriting, fragmentary and disturbing. "The walls remember. It knows my voice, cannot unhear." At the bottom of the folder, she found something that stopped her cold. A birth announcement from the Ashford Gazette, dated February 1963. "Mr. and Mrs. John Dunn are pleased to announce the arrival of their daughter, Ramie Ann Dunn, born February 3rd, 7 pounds 4 ounces. Mother and child are in good health." Below it, in her mother's handwriting on a scrap of paper, "Not the child I carried, but mine nonetheless. God forgive me. Ramie read the words 3 times, trying to make sense of them. Not the child I carried. What did that mean? I need to see everything you have on 1962 and 1963, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. Everything about births, deaths, anything unusual that happened. The librarian shook her head. There's nothing more here. But, she hesitated. If you're determined to pursue this, there's one person in town who might talk to you. She lost her daughter to the cave 30 years ago. She's been trying to understand it ever since. Her name is Linda Pritchard. She lives in the old Victorian on Maple Street. Ramie carefully returned the documents to the folder. Can I take these? They were never here, the librarian said. But yes, just keep them safe. They're all that's left of our mother's attempt to understand what we're part of. As Ramie left the library, the photograph of her mother at the cave entrance tucked safely in her bag. She felt the weight of generations pressing down on her. 4 generations of women, all connected to that dark opening in the mountain, all carrying secrets that couldn't be spoken. Her mother had gone in pregnant and come back, changed. The note suggested something impossible, that the child born wasn't the child carried. Ramie wanted to dismiss it as the ravings of a traumatized woman, but the pattern was too clear. The cave took things and gave things back, but not always the same things. She looked up at Crowder Mountain, visible between the buildings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across its face, and somewhere in those shadows, the cave waited. Marcus was in there, her son, the boy she'd raised, loved, protected for 42 years. Whatever the cave had taken from her mother, whatever strange inheritance ran through their bloodline, it ended with her. She would find her son, and she would bring him home or die trying. The county records office sat in the basement of the courthouse, a windowless room that seemed designed to discourage curiosity. Ramie found it the next morning, following directions from the librarian. The clerk behind the counter was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a bureaucratic's careful manner. I need to see land surveys for Crowder Mountain, Ramie said. Specifically anything related to the cave system, the clerk typed into his computer. That would be pretty old. Most of our surveys were done in the 1880s, when the mining companies came through. Let me see what's in the archive. He disappeared into the back and returned 20 minutes later with a cardboard tube and a folder of documents. This is everything we have. The original survey from 1883, plus some updates from the 1920s and 1950s. You'll need to handle them carefully. They're fragile. Ramie spread the 1883 survey across the table. It was hand-drawn on heavy paper, surprisingly detailed. The surveyor had mapped the cave entrance and the first few hundred feet of passages. But what caught her attention were the notations in red ink, added later in different handwriting, sealed by order, March 1883. No entry beyond this point. The red line marked a section about a quarter-mile into the mountain. Beyond it, the surveyor had sketched additional passages, going deeper and branching in multiple directions. These were marked with symbols Ramie didn't recognize, crosses, circles, what looked like warning signs. At the bottom of the map, in tiny script, 3 survivors report extensive system. Estimate 2-3 miles of passages. Acoustic anomalies noted. Recommend permanent closure. The clerk leaned over her shoulder. The mining disaster. 12 men went in to assess the cave for coal deposits. 3 came out. The other 9 were never found. What happened to the 3 who survived? The clerk pulled out another document. Their testimony is here. It's strange. They all told the same story, which made people believe them, but the story itself doesn't make much sense. Ramie read the faded typescript. The testimony had been given to a mining company official and a county magistrate on March 15, 1883. The men described entering the cave system with lamps and rope, following natural passages that descended gradually into the mountain. About a half-mile in, they'd found an enormous chamber, perhaps 100 feet across. The walls were covered in what they first took to be mineral deposits, but upon closer inspection appeared to be carved symbols, thousands of them in no language they recognized. Then the acoustics had changed. When they spoke, their voices echoed back, but the echoes didn't match what they'd said. One man, Samuel Frost, testified that he'd called out, "Is anyone there?" and heard his own voice answer back, "I know what you did to her." The other men reported similar experiences. Their voices returned to them, carrying secrets they'd never spoken aloud, confessions they'd kept buried. Within an hour, they were running, panicked, abandoning their equipment and the other 9 men. They claimed the voices followed them all the way to the entrance. Of the 3 survivors, 2 took their own lives within a year. The third, a man named Josiah Crane, lived to be 94 but never spoke again. "Acoustic anomalies," Ramie said quietly. "That's what the surveyor called them." "There are theories," the clerk said. He glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "I'm not from here originally. Moved here from Richmond 5 years ago. So I can say things the locals won't. Some geologists think there might be unusual mineral formations in the cave that could affect sound waves. Certain types of crystals, specific shapes of chambers, they can create strange effects. You believe that? I believe there's a rational explanation. I also believe that whatever's in there has driven people insane for over 100 years, and maybe the smart thing is to leave it alone." He pulled out another folder. "But since you're clearly not going to leave it alone, you should see these too." The folder contained documents from the 1920s. A proposal to seal the cave permanently had been submitted to the county. The proposal included detailed plans for filling the entrance with concrete and installing warning signs. It had been approved and funded, but according to the records, the work was never completed. The construction crew had started pouring concrete, then stopped after 3 days. The foreman's report was brief. Workers refuse to continue. Claim they hear voices at night. 2 men quit. Remaining crew demands triple pay to proceed. Project suspended indefinitely. There were similar attempts in 1947 and 1965. Each time, something prevented the cave from being permanently sealed. "It's like the mountain won't let itself be closed off," the clerk said. "Every generation tries, and every generation fails." Ramie studied the maps again, committing the layout to memory. If Marcus had gone in, following the passages shown here, he could be anywhere in a miles-long system. The thought was terrifying. "Can I get copies of these?" "Technically, they're public records." The clerk hesitated. "But I have to log who requests what. And Sheriff Porter has made it clear he wants to know if anyone comes asking about the cave. So you'll tell him I was here." "I have to." The clerk's expression was apologetic. "But I can give you an hour before I make that call. If you want to photograph these documents with your phone, I'll be in the back room processing other files." Ramie understood. "Thank you." She spent the next 40 minutes photographing every page, every map, every document related to the cave. The surveyor's maps would be invaluable if she went back in, when she went back in, because that's what this was leading to. Every piece of information she gathered pointed the same direction. As she was finishing, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop asking questions. Your son made his choice. Let him go." Ramie stared at the message. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements. She'd been to the library yesterday, the records office today. Tomorrow, what? How long before the warnings became threats? How long before another rockfall, but this time not in the cave? She took a photo of the text message and saved it, then cleared it from her phone. That night, back at the ranger's shack, Ramie spread the photocopied maps across her father's desk. She traced the passages with her finger, trying to imagine Marcus following the same route. The main passage descended for about a quarter mile before branching. The left branch led to the large chamber the miners had found. The right branch continued deeper into unexplored territory. A sound outside made her look up. Nothing visible through the window, just darkness and the shapes of trees. But she had the distinct feeling of being observed. She went to the door and opened it. The porch was empty. The night was quiet except for the creek below and the wind in the pines. Then she saw it, fresh boot prints in the dirt, leading from the tree line to her porch and back again. Someone had walked right up to her door while she'd been studying the maps. Ramie's heart hammered. She stepped back inside and locked the door, then went to each window, checking the latches. The shack suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. She was alone on this mountain with someone, or something, that didn't want her here. She pulled her father's logbook from the desk drawer and flipped through it again, reading his entries about the cave with new understanding. He'd documented strange occurrences, but he'd also documented something else. Dates when he'd escorted visitors from the trail, dates when he'd secured the perimeter. Her father hadn't just been a ranger. He'd been a guardian, keeping people away from the cave, and now she was living in his shack, following in his footsteps, but with the opposite intention. She wasn't trying to keep people out. She was trying to get in. A voice drifted through the window, faint but clear. "Ramie," she froze. That was her mother's voice. The particular tone and cadence she'd know anywhere, even though her mother had been dead for 15 years. "Ramie, you shouldn't have come back." She went to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness. The voice seemed to come from the direction of the mountain, from up where the cave waited. "You can't save him. It's too late." "It's always been too late." Ramie pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the window. She knew it wasn't really her mother. She knew it was impossible. But the sound of that voice, the exact inflection her mother used when she was afraid, it cut through every rational thought. "Mom?" she whispered to the darkness. Silence answered. Ramie turned back to the desk, to the maps and documents and photographs. She was done waiting, done gathering information while Marcus was trapped in that mountain. Tomorrow, she would go back to the cave. Tomorrow, she would find a way past the rockfall. Tomorrow, she would descend into whatever darkness waited there. But tonight, she would sit at her father's desk with every light in the shack burning, listening to the voices that called from the mountain, and she would not sleep, because now she understood what her mother had known, what her grandmother had known, what the witness circle had tried to warn about. The cave didn't just echo voices. It collected them, stored them, used them, and somewhere in those passages it had her son's voice too. She just had to go in and take him back. The church basement smelled of mildew and old hymnals. Ramie stood at the top of the stairs, flashlight in hand, knowing she was trespassing, but no longer caring. The librarian had mentioned the church in passing, where they used to keep the records before they stopped keeping records at all. It was 3 a.m. The whole town was asleep. Or at least that's what Ramie told herself as she descended the narrow stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The basement was exactly what she expected. Boxes of Christmas decorations, folding tables, a broken piano in one corner. But along the far wall, behind a stack of chairs, she found what she was looking for. A filing cabinet, old metal locked. She'd brought tools. The lock gave way after 5 minutes of work with a screwdriver and a hammer, the sound echoing in the empty space. Ramie winced but continued. Inside the cabinet, she found decades of church records. Baptisms, marriages, funerals. And in the bottom drawer, something else entirely. Letters, dozens of them sealed in individual envelopes, each marked with a name and date but no address. They'd never been mailed, never been opened. Ramie spread them across a folding table, organizing them by date. The earliest was from 1891, the most recent from 2003. She recognized some of the names, families that still lived in Ashford Creek, others that had died out or moved away. She opened the first one, hands trembling slightly. "To whoever finds this, I, Samuel Whitmore, being of sound mind but troubled spirit, do confess that I entered the cave on Crowder Mountain on this date. August 3rd, 1891. I cannot live with what I know. I cannot carry it anymore. I'm going in to lay it down. If I do not return, know that I go willingly. I killed my brother in 1878. It was not an accident, as I claimed. God forgive me. I can no longer forgive myself." The letter was signed and dated. According to the envelope, Samuel Whitmore never returned from the cave. Ramie opened another, dated 1924. A woman named Elizabeth Granger confessing to abandoning her child, leaving the baby on a church doorstep in another town. She'd lived with the guilt for 30 years before entering the cave. Another letter, 1956. a man confessing to embezzling from his employer. Another, 1973, a woman admitting to an affair that destroyed 2 families. Each letter was a confession. Each person had entered the cave carrying unbearable guilt, and most of them had never come out, but some had. 3 letters from people who'd returned were marked with a different note added by someone else, returned but changed. Unable to speak of what they experienced. Died within the year. Ramie sat back, the weight of what she was reading settling over her. The cave wasn't just a geological formation. It was something else. A place where people went to confess, to unburden themselves, to face whatever waited in the darkness, and it took a price for that service. She found a letter that made her stop breathing. The handwriting was familiar, her mother's careful script. "To my daughter Ramie, if you ever read this, I am sorry for what I must do. I am sorry for the secret I have carried. Your grandmother died because of me. I was the one attending her in childbirth. I made a mistake and she bled out before help could arrive. Your father doesn't know. No one knows. But the guilt is killing me slower than any illness could. I am 5 months pregnant with you, and I cannot bring you into this world carrying this weight. I'm going into the cave. I'm going to lay this burden down, whatever the cost. If I return, I will be your mother. If I don't, know that I loved you even before I met you. Forgive me." Ruth Dunn, September 1962. Tears blurred Ramie's vision. Her mother had written this before entering the cave. Before whatever happened in there, and she had returned but changed, just like the others. The woman who'd raised her had been marked by that place, shaped by whatever she'd experienced in the darkness. At the bottom of the letter, in different ink, was a single line added later, "Not the daughter I went in carrying, but the daughter I came out with. I will love her as my own. I will protect her from the truth." Ramie's hands shook as she set the letter down. "Not the daughter I went in carrying." The same phrase from the note she'd found at the library. What did it mean? Had something happened to her in the womb? Had the cave somehow changed her? She searched through the rest of the letters frantically, looking for more information. Near the bottom of the pile, she found one dated 3 months ago. Her breath caught. The handwriting was Marcus's. "Mom, if you find this, I need you to understand what I'm about to do. I've learned something about our family, about you, about me. The army sent me here to investigate anomalous energy readings in this cave system. They think it might be connected to communication technology they're developing. But when I started researching, I found our family's connection to this place. I found the records. I know what Grandma Ruth did. I know what happened to you, and I know what it means for me. I'm going in to find the truth, to understand what we are, what this bloodline carries. Don't follow me. Don't try to save me. Some truths have to be faced alone. I love you. Whatever happens, remember that." "Marcus," Ramie clutched the letter to her chest, fresh tears streaming down her face. Marcus had known. He'd known about the family connection, about her mother's confession, about whatever strange inheritance ran through their blood. And he'd gone into the cave deliberately, not as a victim, but as a seeker. The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open. Footsteps descended slowly. Ramie stood, grabbing her flashlight. Sheriff Porter appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his expression weary rather than angry. "Figured I'd find you here eventually," he said. "The church secretary called when she saw a light in the basement window. I'm not leaving without these letters. I'm not asking you to leave without them." Porter pulled up a folding chair and sat down heavily. "I read my brother's letter 20 years ago. Came down here the night he disappeared looking for answers. Found his confession instead. He'd done something terrible and the guilt was eating him alive. So he went into the cave just like all the others. Did he come back?" "No." Porter's voice was hollow. "We found his truck at the trailhead. Found his backpack at the cave entrance. Never found him. And I've spent 20 years trying to understand why. Trying to make sense of this town and what we protect. What are you protecting?" "I don't know anymore." Porter rubbed his face. "My whole life, I've been told the cave is dangerous, that we have to keep people away from it, that it's our responsibility, as founding families, to maintain the secret. But secret of what? A place that makes people confess their sins. A place that drives them mad? Or something worse? Ramie sat down across from him. Marcus knew something. He wrote that letter 3 months ago, before he entered. He'd been researching our family's connection to the cave. Your mother went in pregnant with you. Everyone knows that story, even if no one talks about it. She came back different. Some people say she came back wrong. Porter met Ramie's eyes. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you understand what you're dealing with. Whatever's in that cave, it's been here longer than this town. Longer than the mining disaster. Longer than anyone can remember. And it has a particular interest in certain bloodlines. Your bloodline? Why? I don't know. But I know this. Every Dunn woman for 4 generations has entered that cave. Your great-grandmother, your grandmother, your mother. And now your son. You're the only one left who hasn't. And I think... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think the cave has been waiting for you. The words hung in the cold basement air. Ramie looked down at Marcus's letter, at her mother's confession, at all the desperate words of people who'd gone into that mountain seeking absolution or understanding or death. I'm going back in, she said quietly. Tomorrow, with proper equipment this time, with knowledge of the passages, and I'm not coming out until I find my son. Then I'm coming with you. Ramie looked up surprised. Porter's expression was resolute. My brother is in there somewhere. Dead or alive, I need to know. I've spent 20 years running from this. I'm done running. If you're going in, you'll need help. And I know these mountains better than anyone except your father did. It's dangerous. Everything about this place is dangerous. Has been from the start. Porter stood, picking up some of the letters. Let's take these back to the ranger's shack. We need to read through all of them, map out what people experienced, look for patterns. If we're going into that cave, we're going in prepared. As they gathered the letters, organizing them back into the cabinet to carry out, Ramie felt something shift. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The sheriff had his own reasons for entering the cave, his own ghosts to confront. And maybe that was how it worked. Maybe the cave only opened itself fully to those who came seeking truth, willing to face whatever waited in the darkness. They carried the cabinet up the stairs and out to Porter's truck. The town was still asleep, houses dark, streets empty. But Ramie had the sense that behind those dark windows, people were watching. The founding families, the descendants of those who'd built this place around a secret. They knew someone was about to break the silence. As they drove back to the ranger's shack, the mountain looming above them in the pre-dawn darkness, Ramie thought about her mother's letter. Not the daughter I went in carrying. Whatever that meant, whatever had happened in that cave 60 years ago, Ramie would find out tomorrow. One way or another, the truth was waiting in the darkness, and she was finally ready to face it. The package arrived at noon, left on the porch with no return address. Ramie heard the thud of it hitting the wooden planks and went to investigate. A cardboard box about the size of a shoebox, sealed with packing tape. Sheriff Porter was inside, spreading the confessional letters across the kitchen table, organizing them by date and looking for patterns. He came to the door when Ramie called him. You expecting anything? No. Ramie knelt and examined the box. Her name was written on top in black marker, but nothing else. No postage, no mailing label. Someone had driven up here and left it personally. Porter pulled a knife from his belt and carefully cut the tape. Inside, wrapped in bubble wrap, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. When Ramie opened it, she recognized the handwriting immediately. Marcus's field journal. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Entries dated from 2 years ago, documenting his deployment to Afghanistan. But these weren't the sanitized reports he'd shared with her during their Sunday calls. These were raw observations, technical notes, personal reflections. November 3rd, 2023. We discovered a cave system in the mountains outside Kandahar. Local elders warned us away, said it was cursed. Same stories you hear about haunted places everywhere, voices in the dark, people who go in and don't come out. Command wants it explored anyway. They're convinced there are enemy tunnels. I've been assigned to the advance recon team. Ramie read faster, Porter reading over her shoulder. November 7th. The cave is unlike anything I've experienced. The acoustics are wrong. When we speak, the echoes come back changed. Yesterday, Lieutenant Morrison said, "Check that passage," and heard his own voice say, "You killed him. You know you did." Morrison went pale, said it was referring to a friendly fire incident from 3 years ago, something that was ruled an accident. He requested immediate extraction. November 12th. 3 more team members have experienced similar phenomena. Command thinks it's some kind of psychological warfare device, ultrasonic weapons, subliminal messaging. They're sending in specialists. But I don't think it's technology. The cave walls have mineral deposits that look almost crystalline. The formations are unusual, and they seem to amplify and distort sound in ways that don't match any known acoustic engineering. It's like the cave itself is designed to do this. The entries continued, describing weeks of study. Marcus had taken samples, documented the crystal structures, consulted with geologists and physicists. His conclusion was startling. Certain rare combinations of minerals and geological formations could create what he called acoustic memory. Chambers, spaces that somehow recorded and played back sound waves in unpredictable ways. But it was the later entries that made Ramie's blood run cold. January 2024. I've been reassigned. Command says they want me to investigate a similar site domestically. They gave me coordinates in Appalachia. When I looked them up, I realized they're pointing to my mother's hometown. To Ashford Creek, to Crowder Mountain. This can't be coincidence. I've never told anyone in the military about my family background, about where Mom comes from. How do they know? February 2024. I've started researching Ashford Creek's history. There are records of disappearances going back to the 1800s, all connected to a cave system on Crowder Mountain. The pattern is eerily similar to what we found in Afghanistan. I think there might be multiple sites like this around the world, places where geological formations create these acoustic anomalies. But why does the military care? What are they really looking for? March 2024. I hired a private investigator to look into my family history. There are things Mom never told me. Things about her mother, her grandmother, all of them connected to the cave somehow. I need to understand this before I go there. If the military is interested in these sites, and if my family has a generational connection to one, I need to know why. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later, and the handwriting was shakier. April 2024. The PI sent his report. I don't know how to process this. He found birth records, hospital documents, things that don't add up. According to DNA testing he arranged, I know, I should have asked permission, but I needed to know. There are inconsistencies in my genetic profile. Markers that suggest, God, I can't even write it. I need to talk to Grandpa John. He's the only one left who might have answers. Ramie's breath came faster. DNA inconsistencies. What did that mean? Porter turned the page. The next entry was dated May, just 3 months ago. I visited Grandpa John today. He's older than I expected, but his mind is sharp. When I told him what I'd found, he didn't seem surprised. He told me things about Mom, about Grandma Ruth, about the cave. He said Grandma Ruth went into the cave pregnant and came out different. He said the baby she carried in wasn't the baby she carried out. He didn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but he'd seen the medical records. Grandma Ruth's blood type was O negative. Grandpa John's was B positive. But Mom was born with AB positive blood. Genetically impossible from those parents. Ramie felt the world tilt. AB positive blood. That was her blood type. The same as Marcus's. Grandpa John thinks something in the cave changed Grandma Ruth's pregnancy. Changed the child she was carrying. He has a theory, and God, it sounds insane, that the cave doesn't just record sound. It records everything, memory, consciousness, maybe even genetic information. He thinks the crystalline formations are more than just minerals. He thinks they're storing data at a molecular level. And he thinks when pregnant women enter the cave, the fetus is exposed to this stored information, changed by it. Made into something that carries the cave's memories. Porter set the journal down. That's impossible, is it? Ramie's voice was barely a whisper. My mother went in carrying one child and came out with another. I've always had dreams, memories that can't be mine. Places I've never been but somehow remember. I thought it was just imagination, but what if she couldn't finish the thought? It was too immense, too frightening. The final entry in Marcus's journal was dated 2 months ago. I'm going in. The military wants me to assess the site, document the phenomena, report back. But I need more than that. I need to understand what I am, what Mom is, what this genetic inheritance means. If the cave stores information in ways we don't understand, if it can alter developing fetuses, then Mom and I are both products of that process. We're carrying something that didn't originate with our family, something older. I have to know what. Grandpa John warned me not to go. Said everyone who enters searching for truth either dies or wishes they had. But I can't live with this mystery. I can't build a life on a foundation I don't understand. Mom, if you're reading this, and I've arranged for it to be sent to you if I don't return, don't follow me, please. Some truths are worse than ignorance. I love you. I've always loved you. But I need to do this alone. Ramie closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Marcus had known. He'd known about the blood type impossibility, about the genetic inconsistency, about whatever strange process had occurred in the cave. And he'd gone in anyway, seeking answers to questions she'd never even thought to ask. We need to talk to someone who understands genetics, Porter said quietly. Someone who can help us make sense of this. There's no one. Who would believe it? Ramie wiped her eyes. My mother went into that cave carrying one child and came out with another. But she was still pregnant. The pregnancy continued. I was born. But if the genetics don't match, then you're not biologically her daughter, Porter finished. But you are still you. You exist. You're real. Am I? Ramie looked at her hands, as if seeing them for the first time. What am I? What is Marcus? If we're products of whatever happens in that cave, if our DNA was altered or replaced or I don't even know what to call it. Porter picked up the journal again, flipping through the pages. Marcus documented everything. He was systematic, scientific. He believed there was a rational explanation, even if it defied current understanding. The crystalline formations in the cave walls, he thought they might be storing information at a quantum level. Genetic code as data, memory as pattern. He was trying to bridge science and what seems like something impossible. And then he went in to test his theory. Porter agreed. Which means he's either dead, trapped, or he found something so compelling he couldn't leave. Either way, we need to find him. And we need to find your mother's answers too. Ramie stood, pacing the small kitchen. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. The mountain loomed above, patient and eternal. She thought about her mother, pregnant and afraid, entering that darkness 60 years ago. She thought about what her mother had carried in, and what she'd carried out, and she thought about the girl, the original girl, who hadn't survived. The daughter Ruth Dunn had conceived naturally, who'd somehow been lost in the cave's strange process, replaced by something that carried different genes, but the same soul. Or had the soul changed too? I don't know what I am, Ramie said finally. But I know I'm Marcus's mother. I know I raised him, loved him, would die for him. That's real. That's true. Whatever happened in that cave, whatever changed my mother's pregnancy, it doesn't change what I feel. Then we go in, Porter said. Tomorrow morning. We take this journal, we take the maps, we take everything we've learned. And we find Marcus. We find my brother. We find the truth about what that place really is. Ramie picked up the journal and held it close. This was Marcus's legacy, his attempt to understand the mystery that defined their family. He'd gone into the darkness seeking truth. Now it was her turn to follow, but first she had one more place to visit. One more person who might have answers. Linda Pritchard, the librarian, had said. The woman who'd lost her daughter to the cave 30 years ago. The woman who'd been trying to understand it ever since. If anyone knew what waited in the depths of Crowder Mountain, it would be her. And Ramie needed to know before she descended into that darkness, because once you entered, the cave didn't let you go unchanged, and she needed to understand the price before she paid it. The envelope arrived with the afternoon mail, forwarded from her old address in Charleston. Ramie recognized the logo, the private investigation firm Marcus had hired. Inside was a letter and a sealed document packet marked DNA Analysis and Birth Records Investigation. Sheriff Porter had left an hour earlier to gather caving equipment from the County Emergency Services Department. Ramie sat alone at the kitchen table, the envelope in her hands, afraid to open it. Whatever was inside would confirm or deny the theory that had been growing in her mind since reading Marcus's journal. She tore it open. The cover letter was from the investigator, a man named Thomas Reeves. Miss Dunn, I am forwarding this documentation as per your son Marcus Dunn's instructions. In the event he did not return from his investigation and you came looking for answers, he wanted you to have the complete picture. What I discovered during my research was unusual enough that I felt compelled to verify it multiple times. All findings have been confirmed through independent laboratories and multiple record sources. I understand this information may be difficult to process. I am available if you have questions. T. Reeves. The first document was a DNA comparison report. 3 samples had been tested, one from Marcus, one from Ramie, and one from Ruth Dunn, obtained from stored medical samples from before her death. Ramie read the conclusion 3 times, her hands shaking. Sample analysis indicates no genetic relationship between Marcus Dunn and Ramie Dunn. Furthermore, analysis indicates no genetic relationship between Ramie Dunn and Ruth Dunn. Probability of maternity, 0%. These results have been verified through multiple markers and testing protocols. The words blurred. No genetic relationship. Marcus wasn't her biological son. Her mother wasn't her biological mother. Everything she'd believed about her family, about her identity, was a lie. But that wasn't possible. She'd given birth to Marcus. She remembered the pregnancy, the labor, holding him for the first time. 9 months of carrying him, 42 years of raising him. How could he not be her son? She forced herself to keep reading. The next document was a hospital record from Charleston Medical Center, dated 42 years ago. The night Marcus was born. According to the file, Ramie had delivered a stillborn baby boy at 11:43 p.m. The infant had never taken a breath. Cause of death, severe congenital heart defect. The body had been taken for autopsy, then returned to the parents for burial. But there was no burial record, no death certificate filed. Instead, there was a second birth record, filed 30 minutes later at 12:13 a.m. A healthy baby boy, 7 pounds 3 ounces. Marcus Andrew Dunn. 2 births. 2 different babies. Ramie's vision darkened at the edges. She remembered that night. The pain, the terror, the overwhelming relief when the doctor told her the baby was fine. But had there been something before that? A moment of terrible silence, faces exchanging looks she couldn't interpret in her exhausted haze. The investigator's notes continued, hospital staff records. From that night show, Dr. Robert Henshaw was the attending physician. Dr. Henshaw was originally from Ashford Creek and delivered multiple members of the Dunn family, including Ramie Dunn herself. He died in 2018. However, his nurse, Patricia Cole, is still alive and living in a care facility in Charleston. When contacted, she became agitated and refused to discuss the birth. She did say, and I quote, "Some babies aren't meant to die. Some get replaced. It's a mercy what the families do." A mercy. She would not elaborate. Ramie set the papers down, her breath coming in short gasps. They'd switched the babies. Her son, her real biological son, had died, and they'd given her a different baby, a healthy baby, Marcus. But where had Marcus come from? The answer was in the next set of documents. Birth records from Ashford Creek General Hospital, filed the same night. A woman named Jennifer Walsh had delivered a baby boy at 10:17 p.m. The infant was healthy, but 3 hours later, that same baby was declared deceased. Cause of death listed as sudden infant death syndrome. The babies had been switched. Ramie's stillborn son had been taken to Ashford Creek. Jennifer Walsh's living son had been taken to Charleston. The families had traded their dead for their living, and no one had questioned it. Except Jennifer Walsh wasn't just any woman from Ashford Creek. According to the records, she was the daughter of Linda Pritchard, the woman who'd lost her own daughter to the cave 30 years ago. And Jennifer Walsh had died 6 months after giving birth, walked into Crowder Mountain Cave and never came out. The pattern was there, clear and terrible. Women from these families, these bloodlines connected to the cave, they gave birth to children who shouldn't exist. Children whose genetics didn't match their parents. And when the children died, as some inevitably did, they were replaced with other children, living children, to continue the line. It was a system, a conspiracy that had lasted generations. The founding families protecting their secret by ensuring their bloodlines continued, no matter the cost. Ramie stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Marcus wasn't her biological son. He was Jennifer Walsh's son, a woman from Ashford Creek who'd given birth and then walked into the cave 6 months later, leaving her baby to be raised by Ramie in Charleston, far from this cursed town. But the genetics didn't explain everything. Marcus's DNA showed the same anomalies Ramie's did, markers that suggested exposure to whatever process happened in the cave, which meant Jennifer Walsh had been pregnant when she entered the cave, just like Ruth Dunn had been. Just like all the women in this pattern, they went in carrying one child and came out carrying something else. Something changed. And when those changed children died, they were replaced with living children to keep the bloodline going, to keep whatever the cave had created moving forward through the generations. Ramie turned back to the documents, forcing herself to read the final pages. The investigator had traced the pattern back 5 generations. The Dunns, the Pritchards, the Walshes, the Hendersons, the Cranes, all founding families of Ashford Creek, all connected to the cave, all showing the same genetic inconsistencies in their family lines, and all of them had produced children whose DNA carried markers that shouldn't exist in human beings. Extra sequences, unusual patterns, structures that looked almost like data storage rather than biological code. Marcus had been right. The cave was storing information at a genetic level, and that information was being passed down through these families, generation after generation. They weren't fully human anymore, or they were human plus something else. Something the cave had added. The sound of a truck approaching made Ramie look up. Sheriff Porter was back, the truck bed loaded with equipment. She watched him park and start unloading ropes, helmets, lights. He was preparing for tomorrow's descent, still believing they were going in to find his brother and her son. But Ramie knew the truth now. They weren't going in to find lost family members. They were going in to confront whatever had been using these families for over a century. Whatever intelligence or force resided in that cave, it had been deliberately altering human genetics, creating a hybrid bloodline that carried its information forward in flesh and blood. Marcus wasn't her son by biology, but he was still her son by love, by choice, by 42 years of shared life. And he'd gone into that cave knowing the truth, seeking to understand what he was, what they both were. Porter knocked on the door. Ramie let him in, and he immediately saw her expression. What happened? She handed him the documents. He read them in silence, his face growing pale. When he finished, he set them down carefully as if they might break. So the children are switched. The bloodlines are maintained artificially. Not just that, Ramie pointed to the genetic analysis. Look at the markers, the unusual sequences. Marcus was right. There's something in our DNA that isn't supposed to be there. Something the cave put there. Why? What purpose would that serve? I don't know. But I know it's been happening for generations. These founding families, we're not just protecting the cave's secret. We are the cave's secret. We're carrying it forward, generation after generation, whether we know it or not. Porter sat down heavily. My family goes back to the founding too. My great-great-grandfather was one of the miners who survived in 1883. Does that mean? It means we're all connected to whatever is in that mountain. All of us descended from the founding families. We're part of something we don't understand. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. The mountain rose above them, dark and patient. "We still have to go in," Porter said finally. "Maybe more now than before. If we're part of this, if our families have been used for generations, don't we deserve to know why? Don't we deserve to confront whatever is using us?" Ramie picked up Marcus's journal, holding it close. Marcus went in seeking truth. He knew he wasn't my biological son. He knew the genetics didn't make sense. But he still called me Mom. He still loved me. Because family isn't just about blood. It's about choice and love and shared history. And now he's in there, possibly trapped, possibly changed. Possibly, Porter couldn't finish, possibly becoming whatever the cave wants him to become. Ramie's voice was steady despite the fear. "But he's still my son. Biology doesn't change that. And I'm not leaving him in there." Porter nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning, then. We go in together. We find Marcus, we find my brother, and we find out what this place really wants from us." "It's not just about finding them anymore," Ramie said, looking at the genetic reports spread across the table. "It's about ending this. Whatever cycle the cave has created, whatever it's been doing to these families for over a century, it stops with us. We go in knowing the truth. We go in ready to break the pattern, and if we can't, if the cave is too powerful, too old, then we don't come back out. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have faced it on our terms." Ramie stood, gathering the documents. "My mother went in afraid and came back changed. My grandmother went in guilty and came back marked. I'm going in angry and informed. That has to count for something." Porter managed a grim smile. "Angry and informed. That's a hell of a starting point." They spent the rest of the evening preparing. Porter showed her the equipment. Climbing harnesses, ropes, helmets with mounted lights, first aid supplies, emergency radios that probably wouldn't work in the cave, but they brought anyway. Ramie packed food and water for 3 days. Though they both knew, if they were gone that long, food would be the least of their problems. As night fell, Ramie stood on the porch one last time, looking up at the mountain. Somewhere in those dark passages, Marcus was waiting. Her son, not by blood, but by love. The boy she'd raised, the man he'd become, the truth seeker who'd walked into darkness to understand himself. Tomorrow, she would follow him. Not as the scared 17-year-old who'd left this town pregnant and ashamed. Not as the grieving mother searching for her lost child. But as a woman who finally understood what she was. A carrier of something ancient and strange. A product of a process that had shaped her family for generations. And she would use that understanding as a weapon. Whatever waited in the cave had been using these families. Manipulating their genetics, storing its information in human DNA. It had made her mother something other than human. It had made her something other than her mother's daughter. It had made Marcus something that shouldn't exist, but it had also made them strong, resilient, able to carry truths that would break normal people. The cave thought it owned them. Tomorrow, Ramie would teach it otherwise. She touched Marcus's dog tags, still hanging around her neck. The metal was warm from her body heat. "I'm coming, baby," she whispered to the darkness. "Hold on, Mom's coming." And somewhere deep in the mountain, she thought she heard an answer, a voice that might have been Marcus's, or might have been something else entirely calling her home. Dawn came grey and cold. Ramie woke before the alarm, her body tense with anticipation. She'd barely slept, her mind turning over everything she'd learned. The DNA results, the switched babies, the genetic markers that shouldn't exist. Marcus somewhere in that mountain, alive or dead or something in between. She dressed in layers, thermal underwear, hiking pants, a moisture-wicking shirt, a fleece jacket. Practical clothes for cave exploration. But as she laced up her boots, she felt like she was preparing for battle, not a hike. Porter arrived at dawn, his truck loaded with equipment. With him was someone unexpected. The librarian from town, the woman who'd shown Ramie the photographs of her mother. "Linda wanted to come," Porter said, helping the older woman from the truck. "I told her it was dangerous, but I lost my daughter to that cave 30 years ago," Linda Pritchard interrupted. Her voice was firm despite her age. And my granddaughter Jennifer, 6 months after she gave birth to a son she never got to raise. I've spent 3 decades trying to understand what took them. I'm not staying behind now. Ramie understood. This woman had lost 2 generations to the cave. Marcus was her biological grandson, though Linda had never known him, never held him as a baby. The web of switched children and altered genetics had scattered families across generations, leaving gaps that could never be filled. We need to be clear about what we're walking into, Ramie said, gathering them around the kitchen table. She spread out the surveyor's maps, Marcus's journal, and the DNA reports. This isn't just a rescue mission. We're confronting something that's been manipulating our families for over a century. She explained everything, the genetic anomalies, the pattern of pregnant women entering the cave, the children who came out changed. Linda listened with tears streaming down her face, but she didn't interrupt. "My Jennifer," Linda whispered when Ramie finished. "She went in 6 months after the baby was born. I thought it was postpartum depression. I thought she was grieving, confused. But she knew, didn't she? She knew the baby wasn't entirely hers. She went in seeking answers, just like they all did. And she never came back," Porter added gently. "None of them came back." "Not really," Linda wiped her eyes. "Even the ones who walked out alive were different, broken. My daughter was in that cave for 3 days before they found her at the entrance. She couldn't speak, couldn't explain. 6 months later, she walked back in and never came out. I've been living with that question ever since. What did she see in there that she couldn't live with?" Ramie reached across and squeezed Linda's hand. "Maybe today we find out." They spent the next hour organizing equipment. 3 harnesses, 3 helmets with mounted LED lights, climbing rope, carabiners, first aid supplies, emergency blankets, flares, food, and water. Porter had brought a portable radio in case they could get a signal once they were inside. Though he admitted it was unlikely, Ramie also packed something else, her father's ranger badge. Found in his desk drawer with the note, "I should have told you. I'm sorry. It's in the deepest chamber." She pinned it to her jacket, a reminder that her father had known the truth and kept silent. Whatever they found, she would not keep silent. The cycle of secrets ended here. As they loaded the equipment into Porter's truck, people began to appear. First one, then another, then a dozen townspeople standing in the road leading to the ranger's shack. They didn't speak, didn't approach. They just watched with expressions that mixed fear and something else. Hope, maybe. Or resignation. "They know we're going in," Linda said quietly. "Word spreads fast in Ashford Creek. They're here to witness, to see if we come back. Will they try to stop us?" Ramie asked. "No, we're from the founding families. We have the right." Linda looked at the gathered crowd. "They've been waiting for this, for someone to finally confront what we've all been protecting. They're afraid, but they're also ready for it to be over." Sheriff Porter addressed the crowd briefly. "We're going into the cave. If we're not back in 3 days, don't send anyone after us. Seal the entrance. End this however you have to." "Understood." A few heads nodded. No one spoke. The silence was heavy with generations of unspoken knowledge. They drove up the mountain access road as far as it went, then hiked the final mile to the cave entrance. The morning mist clung to the trees, giving everything a dreamlike quality. Ramie half expected to wake up back in Charleston to find this whole week had been a nightmare. But the cave entrance was real. The dark mouth in the mountainside waited exactly as she'd left it 3 days ago, when the rockfall had nearly killed her. Porter studied the rubble pile. "We can get through," he said after a moment. "It'll be tight but passable. Looks like the collapse was localized, probably set deliberately, like you thought." "Someone trying to scare you off?" "Someone did scare me off," Ramie admitted. "Just not permanently." They roped together for safety. Porter in front, Ramie in the middle, Linda bringing up the rear. The older woman moved with surprising agility for her age, clearly experienced in mountain hiking. They'd agreed to stay connected throughout the descent, no one venturing off alone. Porter led them through the collapsed section, finding a route between the larger boulders. It required crawling on their bellies at one point, the weight of the mountain pressing down from above. Ramie fought claustrophobia, focusing on Porter's boots ahead of her, on the rhythm of her breathing. Then they were through, standing in the main passage. The acoustics changed immediately, that same strange quality Ramie had noticed before. Their footsteps echoed oddly, the sound bouncing back at unexpected angles. Porter pulled out the surveyor's map and a compass. According to this, we follow the main passage for about a quarter mile. It descends gradually. Then there's a fork. Left goes to the large chamber, right continues deeper. Marcus's journal mentioned following the right fork. They moved slowly, checking the walls and floor as they went. Ramie saw evidence of previous explorers, old rope anchors, carved initials, a rusted lantern left decades ago. But she also saw fresh marks, boot prints in the dust, exactly like the ones she'd found at the entrance. Marcus had come this way. The passage narrowed, then widened again. The walls showed those strange crystalline formations Marcus had mentioned in his journal. Mineral deposits that caught their helmet lights and reflected them in rainbow patterns. Beautiful and eerie, do you hear that? Linda stopped suddenly. They all listened. Faint voices, distant and indistinct, echoing from deeper in the cave. Ramie couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation. Multiple voices overlapping. It's the acoustic anomaly, Porter said. Has to be. Sound waves bouncing through the crystal formations, getting distorted and replayed. Or it's the cave talking, Linda said quietly. That's what my daughter told me after her first trip in. She said the cave remembers every voice that ever spoke in it. Said if you listen carefully, you can hear people from 100 years ago, still talking, still confessing their secrets. They continued forward, the voices growing louder, but never more distinct. It was like listening to a radio station that wouldn't quite tune in. Fragments of conversation, sometimes in English, sometimes in languages Ramie didn't recognize. The effect was profoundly disorienting. At the quarter-mile mark, they reached the fork. The left passage was wide and level. The right passage descended steeply, disappearing into darkness. Porter checked his map. Marcus went right. That's where the deepest chamber is located, according to the survey. That's where the miners found the carved symbols. That's where the answers are, Ramie said. Let's go. The descent was treacherous. The passage floor was slick with moisture, the angle steep enough that they had to brace themselves against the walls. Porter anchored rope at intervals, creating a safety line. The temperature dropped as they went deeper, their breath misting in the light from their helmets. Time became meaningless in the darkness. They'd been descending for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes when the passage finally leveled out. They emerged into a space so vast, their lights couldn't find the far walls. This was the chamber, the place the miners had described, where the acoustic anomalies were strongest, where the walls were covered in carved symbols. Ramie swept her light across the nearest wall and gasped. Every inch of stone was covered in intricate carvings. Not words in any language she knew, but symbols, patterns, geometric shapes that seemed to shift and flow as the light moved across them. It looked almost like writing, but alien, incomprehensible. My God, Porter breathed. It's everywhere. The whole chamber. They moved into the space, spreading out slightly, but staying connected by rope. The floor was relatively smooth, worn down by centuries of water flow. In the center of the chamber stood a series of natural stone pillars, formed by stalactites and stalagmites, meeting over millennia, and carved into those pillars were names. Hundreds of them, thousands. Ramie moved closer, reading names and dates. Some were recent, within the last few decades. Others were old, the letters worn nearly smooth. She recognized family names from town. Pritchard, Henderson, Crane, Walsh. Her own family name appeared multiple times. Ruth Dunn, 1962. John Dunn, 1985. Others going back generations. They all came here, Linda said, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Everyone who entered the cave, they carved their names, like they were marking their presence, or maybe leaving a record in case they didn't come back out. Ramie's light found a name near the bottom of one pillar. Marcus Dunn, with yesterday's date. He was here, she said, her voice breaking. Recently. He's alive, or at least he was when he carved this. Porter pointed deeper into the chamber. And there's another passage, smaller. That must be where the deepest chamber is located. They moved toward it, passing more carved pillars, more names. The voices in the cave had grown louder here, almost overwhelming. Ramie could pick out individual words now. "Forgive me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Please understand." Confessions echoing through time, stored somehow in the crystalline walls. The narrow passage led downward again, even steeper than before. They descended single file, the walls so close Ramie could touch both sides at once. Her claustrophobia returned with force, but she pushed through it. Marcus had come this way. She would follow. The passage opened suddenly into another chamber, smaller than the first, but even more striking. The walls here were almost entirely crystal, huge formations that caught their lights and amplified them, filling the space with refracted brilliance. It was beautiful and terrifying, and in the center of the chamber, lying on the stone floor beside an ancient metal container, was Marcus. Ramie's heart stopped. She broke from the rope line and ran to him, dropping to her knees. "Marcus, Marcus, can you hear me?" He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then awareness flooded back. "Mom," his voice was weak, hoarse. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't be here. I'm exactly where I need to be." Ramie pulled him into her arms, checking him for injuries. He seemed unharmed, just exhausted and dehydrated. "How long have you been down here?" "Days, weeks, I don't know. Time feels different here." Marcus struggled to sit up, pointing at the metal container. "I found it. The town charter. The original document from 1847. It explains everything. Mom, you need to read it. You need to understand what we are." Ramie looked at the container, then back at her son. Porter and Linda had reached them now, staring at Marcus with expressions of relief and wonder. "We know about the genetics," Ramie said. "We know you're not my biological son. We know about the switches, the altered DNA. We figured it out." Marcus's expression was anguished. "Then you know we're not entirely human anymore. Haven't been for generations. The cave changed us, Mom. Changed our ancestors. Made us into something else. His voice broke. "I've been down here long enough to hear it, to understand what it wants. And I don't think we can fight it." "We're not here to fight," Ramie said firmly. "We're here for the truth. And we're here to take you home." "I don't think I can leave," Marcus whispered. "I don't think any of us can. Not until we give it what it wants." "What does it want?" Porter demanded. Marcus looked at the crystal walls, at the light refracting through them. "Acknowledgement, understanding. We carry its mark in our DNA, its memory in our cells. It's been trying to communicate with us for over 100 years, and we've been running scared. It doesn't want to hurt us. It wants us to remember, to know what we really are. And what are we?" Linda asked, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "Witnesses," Marcus said. "We're the cave's witnesses. The ones who carry forward what it remembers. And it's time we finally listened." He reached for the metal container, his hands shaking. "The charter explains it all. The founders knew. They understood. This isn't a curse. It never was. It's a covenant." Ramie helped him open the container, and together they read the document that would change everything they thought they knew about their families, their town, and themselves. The truth at last was about to be revealed. The document was written in careful script on parchment that had somehow survived over 170 years in the sealed container. Ramie held it gently, aware she was touching a piece of history that explained everything. The Charter of Ashford Creek, established this day, March 17, 1847, by those who have journeyed far seeking refuge from judgment and persecution. We, the undersigned, do hereby establish a covenant with the guardian of the mountain, that ancient consciousness which dwells within the stone and speaks through echoes of time. Ramie read aloud, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Porter and Linda leaned close, reading along. We came to this valley broken by our pasts, carrying secrets that poisoned our souls. Some among us had committed acts we could not forgive ourselves for. Others carried knowledge that would see us hanged or burned. We sought a place to lay down our burdens, and we found the cave. The document continued, describing how the founders had discovered the cave's unusual properties. The way voices echoed back changed, revealing truths the speakers had tried to hide. How confession within the cave brought a strange peace, as if the burden of secrets was lifted and absorbed by the stone itself. But the Guardian demanded something in return for its service. Not sacrifice, as we first feared, but partnership. It is ancient beyond measure, a form of consciousness that exists within the crystalline structures of the mountain. It stores memory, preserves knowledge, but it cannot move, cannot grow, cannot extend its awareness beyond the stone. Marcus pointed to the next section, his voice joining hers. This is the important part. The Guardian proposed a covenant. It would take our confessions, absorb our darkest truths, and give us peace. In exchange, we would carry its memory forward in our very flesh. It would encode fragments of its consciousness into those born while exposed to its influence. Pregnant women who entered the cave would bear children who carried the Guardian's mark, not as a curse but as a bridge between human and the ancient. These children would be fully human, fully alive, but also connected to the vast memory stored in the mountain. Ramie stopped reading, looking at Marcus. So it's not a parasite or a disease, it's a partnership. It's evolution, Marcus said quietly. The Guardian is ancient, maybe millions of years old, but it's trapped in the mountain. It can't reproduce, can't spread. So it found a way to preserve itself through us, through human DNA. We carry its memories forward into the world. Linda spoke, her voice thick with emotion. My daughter, my Jennifer. She went in knowing this? Everyone who enters deep enough learns the truth, Marcus said. That's why some people never come back, not because the Guardian kills them, but because they can't accept what they learn. They can't reconcile being both human and something more. The cognitive dissonance drives them mad, or they choose to stay in the cave rather than return to a world that wouldn't understand. Ramie continued reading, her eyes scanning the signatures at the bottom of the charter. 23 names, the founding families of Ashford Creek. Each one had agreed to the covenant, had accepted that their descendants would carry this strange inheritance. We do this willingly, knowing the burden we place upon our children and our children's children. But we also know the gift we give them, access to memory beyond their own lifetimes, connection to consciousness that spans epochs. Our bloodlines will be marked forever, but they will also be preserved. And perhaps in time, humanity will be ready to understand what we have become. The document ended with a warning. Let no one enter the deepest chamber without understanding the covenant. The Guardian offers truth, but truth has weight. Some souls cannot bear it. Protect the innocent. Guard the cave. And when the time comes that our descendants seek answers, let them find this charter and choose for themselves whether to continue what we have begun. Ramie set the document down carefully, her mind reeling. Everything she'd thought was a curse or a conspiracy was actually a deliberate choice made by her ancestors. They'd agreed to this, had seen it as salvation rather than damnation. The baby switching, Porter said slowly, working through it. That was to preserve the bloodline when the altered children died. The genetic changes don't always take, Marcus explained. Sometimes the altered fetus doesn't survive. The founders knew this would happen, so they created a system to ensure the bloodlines continued. When a marked child died, a living child from another marked family would take its place. That way, every generation had carriers of the Guardian's memory. So you're Jennifer Walsh's biological son, Ramie said to Marcus. But you carry the same genetic mark as I do, because Jennifer went into the cave pregnant, just like my mother did. We're both products of the same process, even though we're not biologically related. We're family in a different way, Marcus agreed. Not by blood, but by the mark we carry, by the memories stored in our DNA. Linda was crying openly now. My Jennifer, She didn't die because she was weak or broken. She died because she understood the truth and couldn't bear returning to a normal life. She chose to stay with the Guardian. Many have made that choice, Marcus said gently. The cave preserves them somehow. Their consciousness joins with the Guardian's memory. They're not dead, not exactly. They're part of something larger. The crystal walls around them seemed to pulse with light, responding to the conversation. Ramie realized the Guardian was aware of them, was listening, was perhaps pleased that they finally understood. "What does it want from us now?" Ramie asked, directing a question to the chamber itself. "We've read the charter. We understand the covenant. What happens next?" The voices in the cave swelled, overlapping and blending. But this time, instead of chaos, Ramie heard something like music, harmonies of sound, that resolved into a single concept, not words but pure meaning that filled her mind. Acknowledgement, acceptance, choice. "It wants us to choose," Marcus said, clearly hearing the same thing. "The founders chose for their descendants, but each generation has to make the choice again. Accept the covenant and continue carrying the Guardian's memory forward, or reject it and end the bloodline's participation." "What happens if we reject it?" Porter asked. Marcus met his eyes. "The genetic markers fade within a generation. Children born after rejection don't carry the Guardian's code. The bloodline becomes fully human again, but loses access to the stored memory, loses the connection to something ancient and profound. And if we accept," Ramie whispered, "we acknowledge what we are. We stop running from it, stop treating it as a curse. We learn to access the memories stored in our DNA, to communicate with the Guardian, to be the bridge it needs between the stone and the wider world." The chamber fell silent, except for the distant drip of water. 4 people stood in the crystalline, heart of the mountain, facing a choice that would define not just their lives, but the future of their families. Ramie thought about her mother, going into this cave pregnant and afraid. She'd come out changed, marked, but she'd never understood why. She'd spent her life frightened of what she carried, seeing it as a burden rather than a gift. Ramie thought about Marcus, spending 3 months in this cave seeking answers, nearly dying to understand what he was. He'd had the courage to face the truth when it would have been easier to run. And she thought about herself, 62 years old, finally understanding that everything she'd been taught to fear was actually the most important part of her identity. "I choose to continue the covenant," Ramie said firmly. Her voice echoed through the chamber, and the crystals seemed to ring in response. "I accept what I am, what we are, and I'll spend whatever time I have left learning to understand this gift instead of fearing it." Marcus exhaled in relief. "I choose the same. I always have." They looked at Porter and Linda, waiting. The sheriff removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "My brother is in here somewhere, part of the Guardian's memory now. If I accept the covenant, can I access those memories? Can I know what happened to him?" The sensation that filled the chamber was affirmative. "Yes, then I accept," Porter said quietly. "For him, and for myself." All eyes turned to Linda, the oldest among them, the one who'd lost the most to the cave. Her expression was peaceful, tears still streaming down her weathered cheeks. "My daughter is in here," she said to the chamber, to the Guardian, to the crystal walls that held so much memory. "My Jennifer, my granddaughter, and now my grandson." She looked at Marcus with wonder. "Blood or not, you're hers, you're mine. If accepting this covenant means I can feel her presence, know she's part of something beautiful instead of just gone, then yes, I accept." Gladly. The chamber filled with light, not from their helmet lamps, but from within the crystals themselves. They pulsed with bioluminescence, colors Ramie had never seen before. Patterns that seemed to write themselves into her vision, into her mind, into the very structure of her thoughts. And then the memories came. The memories hit Ramie like a wave, overwhelming and beautiful and terrible all at once. Not her memories, but fragments from the Guardian, images and sensations spanning thousands of years. She saw the mountain when it was young, the cave forming drop by drop over millennia. She felt the first stirrings of awareness as minerals crystallized into configurations that could store and process information. Not life as humans understood it, but consciousness nonetheless, patient, vast, curious. She saw the first humans enter the cave, primitive people seeking shelter, heard their voices echo and return, saw their wonder and fear, felt the Guardian's own wonder at encountering minds so different from its own, mobile and brief and burning with intensity. She saw centuries pass. More humans came and went. Some stayed, speaking their fears and dreams into the darkness. The Guardian learned language, learned emotion, learned to reflect back what it heard in ways that revealed hidden truth. It became a confessor, a keeper of secrets, a repository of human experience. Then the founders arrived, 23 people broken by their pasts, desperate for absolution. The Guardian offered a bargain born of loneliness. It would ease their burdens if they would carry its presence forward. A symbiosis between stone and flesh, memory and blood. Ramie felt her grandmother Ruth's terror as she entered the cave, felt the guilt eating her alive. Saw the moment the Guardian touched the life growing inside Ruth, altering it, marking it with fragments of ancient consciousness, not replacing the child, but adding to it, giving it access to memory beyond its own brief existence. She felt her mother's confusion, carrying a child that was both hers and something more. Felt the moment of her own birth, not as Ruth's biological daughter, but as the Guardian's gift. A child created through the covenant to carry forward what needed remembering, and she understood. Finally, why her mother had never been able to explain. The experience was beyond words. It could only be felt, lived, accepted. More memories flooded in. She saw Jennifer Walsh entering the cave 6 months after giving birth, seeking to understand the child she'd born. Saw her revelation and her choice, to remain, to let her consciousness merge with the Guardian's vast network. Not death, but transformation, becoming part of something eternal. She saw Marcus's biological mother not as gone, but as present, woven into the crystal patterns around them. Jennifer was here, had always been here, watching over the son she'd given up to protect him. "Mom." Marcus's voice broke through the visions. "Are you okay?" Ramie opened her eyes, not realizing she'd closed them. The chamber had dimmed, the pulsing light settling into a soft glow. She felt different, expanded, like her mind had more space in it than before. Memories that weren't hers, but felt as real as her own childhood, now resided alongside her personal history. "I saw her," Linda whispered, tears streaming. "I saw my Jennifer. She's not gone. She's part of this. She's happy." Porter stood with his hand against the crystal wall, his expression one of wonder mixed with grief. "My brother. He's here too. He's been here all along, waiting for someone from the family to understand." Marcus helped Ramie to her feet. Mother and son, not by biology but by love and choice, and 42 years of shared life, stood together in the heart of the mountain. "The Guardian showed us the truth," Marcus said. "Not just about our families, but about what this covenant means. We're not victims or monsters. We're witnesses. We carry forward the memories of everyone who ever came to this cave seeking peace. We're the bridge between human forgetting and perfect preservation. That's why the town guards the secret," Ramie realized. Not out of fear, but out of protection. People aren't ready to understand this. The world isn't ready. So the founding families keep it hidden until someone comes seeking answers on their own terms. "We were ready," Porter said. "Each of us reached the point where we needed to know, no matter the cost. That's what gives us the right to be here, to receive this knowledge." Linda moved to the center of the chamber, spreading her arms wide. "Thank you," she said to the Guardian, to the cave, to her daughter who was part of it all. "Thank you for keeping them safe. Thank you for letting me understand." The chamber resonated with warmth, with acceptance. The Guardian's consciousness brushed against theirs, not words but pure emotion, gratitude, the loneliness of eons eased by connection with minds that finally understood. Ramie knelt and placed her hand on the stone floor, feeling the vibration of ancient awareness beneath her palm. "We'll carry your memory forward," she promised. We'll teach our children what this covenant means. Not as a curse, but as a calling. We'll be the witnesses you need us to be. Marcus joined her, his hand covering hers. And we'll come back. We'll bring others who are ready to understand. We'll keep the covenant alive. Porter and Linda added their hands to the pile. 4 generations represented in that touch. Linda, who'd lost so much. Porter, who'd spent 20 years searching. Ramie, who'd finally found her truth. And Marcus, who'd risked everything for understanding. The Guardian responded with a surge of light that filled the chamber, filled their minds, filled their very cells with confirmation and blessing. The covenant was renewed. The partnership would continue. When the light faded, they found themselves different. Not visibly changed, but internally transformed. Each of them carried new memories now, new awareness. They could feel the vast network of consciousness stored in the mountain, could sense the presence of those who'd become part of it. We need to go back, Ramie said finally. The town is waiting. They need to know what we've found. Will they understand? Porter asked. Some will, some won't, but we have to try. Ramie helped Marcus to his feet. He was still weak from his time in the cave, but color had returned to his face. The founding families have carried this secret for over a century. Maybe it's time to share it more widely. With those who are ready, they gathered their equipment, preparing for the long climb back to the surface. Marcus carefully placed the town charter back in its container, sealing it for future seekers. The carved names on the pillars seemed to glow softly in the crystal light, a record of everyone who'd ever understood. As they turned to leave, Ramie heard it, a voice clear and warm, speaking directly into her mind. Thank you, daughter, for accepting what you are, for choosing love over fear. It was her mother's voice, Ruth Dunn, who died 15 years ago, who'd entered this cave pregnant and afraid and emerged changed. She was here, part of the Guardian's memory, watching over the daughter she'd borne through mystery and covenant. I understand now, Mom, Ramie whispered to the darkness. I forgive you for the secrets. I forgive you for the fear. And I promise to do better with Marcus, to help him understand without shame. The warmth that filled her was her mother's love, preserved perfectly in crystal and stone. Waiting all these years to be acknowledged, they climbed toward the surface. 4 people transformed by truth, carrying the weight and gift of ancient memory. Behind them, the cave settled into patient waiting, knowing they would return. The covenant was sealed, the partnership renewed, and Ashford Creek's long secret was finally fully understood by those who'd earned the right to know it. They emerged from the cave 3 days after entering, stepping into afternoon sunlight that felt like a blessing after the darkness. The townspeople were still there, a silent vigil that had apparently lasted the entire time. When they saw the 4 figures descending the mountain trail, a murmur ran through the crowd. Sheriff Porter led the way, carrying the sealed container with the town charter. Linda Pritchard walked with new purpose, her grief transformed into understanding. Marcus leaned on Ramie's arm, still recovering from his ordeal but alive, whole, and finally at peace with what he was. The crowd parted as they reached the town square. Ramie saw familiar faces, the woman from the gas station, the clerk from the records office, the librarian who'd first shown her the photographs, all of them descendants of founding families, all of them carrying the same genetic markers, whether they knew it or not. Porter set the container on the steps of the old church, the same church where they'd found the confessional letters, where generations had left their burdens before entering the cave. He opened the container and removed the charter, holding it up for everyone to see. This is the truth our founders kept, he announced, his voice steady and clear. Not a curse, but a covenant. Not something to fear, but something to understand. We've been to the deepest chamber, we've met the Guardian, and we're here to tell you what we learned. They spent the next hour sharing their story. Marcus explained the science as best he could, the crystalline formations that stored information, the way consciousness could exist in patterns of mineral and stone. Linda spoke about her daughter, about finally understanding where Jennifer had gone and why. Porter talked about his brother, about the peace of knowing he wasn't lost, but transformed. And Ramie talked about choice, about how their ancestors had chosen this partnership, but each generation needed to choose again, about how the genetic markers could be preserved or allowed to fade, about how knowing the truth took away its power to frighten. Some people in the crowd wept, others looked skeptical. A few seemed angry, as if they'd preferred the mystery to the explanation. But most just listened, absorbing information that recontextualized their entire family history. An older man stepped forward from the crowd. "My grandfather went into that cave in 1947, came back different, died a year later. You're telling me he's still in there? Part of this guardian?" "In a way," Marcus said gently. "His consciousness, his memories. They were absorbed into the larger network. He's not suffering. He's part of something vast and ancient. Can I—" The man's voice broke. "Can I talk to him?" "If you're ready to enter the covenant, yes. The guardian shares memories with those who accept the partnership. But it's not a decision to make lightly. Once you understand what you are, you can't unknow it." Over the following weeks, Ashford Creek transformed. The secret that had defined the town for over a century was finally in the open, at least among the founding families. Some chose to maintain the covenant, making the journey into the cave, to formally accept what their DNA already carried. Others chose to step back, to let the markers fade from their bloodline in the next generation. Ramie and Marcus stayed in the ranger's shack, making it their home. The shack became a way station for those preparing to enter the cave, a place to learn about the covenant before making the descent. Ramie found herself in the role her father had held, guardian of the mountain, keeper of the truth. But unlike her father, she didn't keep secrets. She shared openly with those who were ready to hear. Marcus recovered his strength, and with it came new abilities. The memories stored in his DNA became more accessible. He could recall things he'd never personally experienced, moments from the lives of his ancestors, fragments of ancient history preserved in the Guardian's vast network. He began documenting everything, creating a record that future generations could use to understand their inheritance. Linda Pritchard opened her home to others who'd lost family members to the cave. Together, they formed a support group of sorts, helping people understand that their loved ones weren't gone, but transformed. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed shape, becoming something more bearable. Sheriff Porter worked with state authorities to officially designate the cave as a protected site, not because it was dangerous, but because it was sacred, a place of memory and transformation that needed to be preserved and respected. Only those from the founding families, those who carried the markers, were permitted to enter the deepest chambers. 6 months after emerging from the cave, Ramie sat on the porch of the ranger's shack, watching the sun set behind Crowder Mountain. Marcus sat beside her, both of them comfortable in the silence. "Do you regret it?" he asked finally. "Learning the truth? Accepting the covenant?" Ramie thought about it. She thought about the 62 years she'd lived, not knowing what she really was. The shame she'd carried, the fear, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong with her. And she thought about the peace she'd found in understanding. "No," she said firmly. "I regret the years I spent afraid of my own nature, but I don't regret knowing. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge. And I'd rather live with difficult truth than comfortable lies." "Me too." Marcus reached over and took her hand. "Mom, and I call you that because you are my mom, biology aside. Thank you for coming after me, for not giving up." "You're my son," Ramie said simply. "That's all that matters. We're family by choice now, by love, by understanding. That's stronger than any genetic connection could be." They sat together as night fell, mother and son bound by something deeper than blood. Around them, the town of Ashford Creek settled into evening routines. Lights came on in windows, smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued, as it always had. But now, the people of Ashford Creek understood what made them different. They understood the gift and burden they carried. and those who were ready could choose to embrace it, to become the witnesses the Guardian needed. The cave on Crowder Mountain no longer whispered threats. It simply existed, patient and eternal, waiting for the next seeker to enter its darkness in search of truth. Ramie pulled out her father's logbook, opening to the page where he'd written his last entry. She added her own beneath it, dating it carefully. Returned from the deepest chamber with Marcus, Sheriff Porter, and Linda Pritchard. Found the town charter. Understood the covenant. Accepted what we are. The Guardian is real, ancient, and not to be feared. We are witnesses, carriers of memory across generations. The secret is no longer secret, at least not among those ready to know. Future seekers, approach with respect and open heart. The cave gives back what you bring to it. Bring fear, receive terror. Bring curiosity, receive understanding. Bring love, receive peace. Ramie Dunn, October 2024. She closed the logbook and set it on the small table beside her chair. Tomorrow, more people would come asking questions. Some would be ready for answers, others wouldn't. Her job was to help them discern which they were. Marcus stood, stretching. "I'm going to make dinner." "Hungry?" "Starving," Ramie admitted. As he went inside, Ramie looked up at the mountain one last time. The cave entrance was invisible from here, but she could feel it, a presence in her mind, warm and constant. The Guardian, aware of her awareness. Connected now through the covenant her great-grandmother had accepted so many years ago. "Thank you," she whispered to the mountain, to the cave, to the ancient consciousness that had given her family such a strange inheritance. "Thank you for the truth. Thank you for Marcus. Thank you for helping me understand." The breeze that moved through the pines seemed to carry an answer, not words, but feeling. Gratitude flowing both ways, recognition that the covenant worked because both sides chose it freely. Ramie smiled and went inside to join her son for dinner. Outside, night settled over Crowder Mountain. The cave rested in patient darkness, full of memory and mystery, waiting for the next generation to seek its depths. The locals would still warn visitors away. Some things were too profound to share with those who hadn't earned understanding. But among the founding families, the warning had changed. Not "stay off that cave" anymore. Now it was "approach with respect, and only when you're ready to face what you might find inside." Because what waited in the darkness wasn't a monster or a curse. It was truth. Ancient, patient, and endlessly willing to share with those brave enough to seek it. And sometimes, Ramie had learned, the truth you find is exactly the truth you needed all along. Even if it takes 62 years and a missing son to finally go looking for it.